have agreed a price cap on Russian oil in an effort to stop Moscow profiting from the energy crisis. The limit is $60 a barrel, while on Friday, Russian crude oil was trading at around $67 a barrel. A senior aide to Ukraine's president says the price should be capped at $30 to hit Russia's economy harder. The Foreign Secretary has warned that President Putin could use peace talks with Ukraine as an opportunity to rearm Russian forces. Speaking to the Daily Telegraph, James Cleverly says there's a risk that a ceasefire would be used by the Russian president to train up more troops and produce more ammunition. In other news, the Immigration Minister has defended the government's handling of migrants crossing the English Channel after more than 44,000 have reached British shores this year. Speaking to GBNews, Robert Jenrick said stopping migrant crossings is a priority for the government. He also admitted it could cost the Conservatives at the next election if numbers aren't reduced. Mr Jenrick said UK and French authorities need to work together.
We've tried to negotiate with the French, and the Home Secretary signed a deal just a few weeks ago, which is an improvement on the situation, but it isn't the answer. It's certainly not a silver bullet. It does mean that there'll be more French officers on the beaches intercepting boats, but arrests are low, and it doesn't seem to break the people smugglers' business. So we're clearly going to have to go much further than that. Some of that will be diplomatic, and Rishi Sunak seems to have built a good rapport with President Macron, but a lot of it's going to be harder edged than that. It's going to be using our National Crime Agency, police, security services, GCHQ to go upstream.
Police have charged a third person with murder after two teenage boys were fatally stabbed in southeast London last weekend. 18-year-old Hussein Bar has been charged with murder after two 16-year-olds were stabbed to death just a mile apart. Two others, aged 16 and 15, appeared at Bexley Magistrates Court yesterday, charged with murder. They were both remanded in youth custody. There's been a limited easing of COVID restrictions in two major cities in China. In the southern city of Shenzhen, residents will no longer be required to show a negative COVID test result to use public transport or to enter public parks. And in the capital, Beijing, testing booths have been shut and removed, and a negative test is no longer needed to shop in a supermarket. It follows several days of national protests against 3 years of strict coronavirus measures. Thousands of TSSA members are to walk out on the 17th of December in a dispute over jobs, pay and conditions. Services from 6 further train operators are expected to be affected on top of the 2 previously announced. The union says its members feel they're being treated with contempt by train companies and the government, while the Department for Transport has urged unions and rail operators to work together to find a resolution. And in the NHS, neonatal and critical care units are among the services that will be protected from strikes in the build-up to Christmas. The Royal College of Nursing says chemotherapy, dialysis and paediatric intensive care will also not be impacted during planned industrial action on the 15th and 20th of December. Other services will be severely reduced. Matt Hancock has revealed he was warned that COVID-19 could kill hundreds of thousands of people in the UK 2 months before the country was placed under lockdown. In his new book, the former Health Secretary said the Chief Medical Officer for England, Professor Chris Whitty, told him in January 2020 that in a worst-case scenario, 820,000 people could die. The independent MP for West Suffolk made his first appearance in the House of Commons yesterday after taking part in ITV's I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here in Australia. A company that makes plastic alternative packaging from seaweed has become the first UK winner of Prince William's Earthshot Prize. Notpla is one of 5 entrepreneurs who've been awarded £1 million to scale up their green innovation projects. The Prince of Wales says the Earthshot solutions prove we can overcome climate change and change our future. And today marks 30 years since the first ever text message was sent. 1 in 3 people still send and receive SMS messages every day. The first text was sent by engineer Neil Papworth in December 1992. It read, "Merry Christmas." He told GB News he had no idea it would turn into something so big.
Instead of carrying around a clunky analog phone and a pager on their hip, you'll be able to combine those two devices, and a secretary or something could send a message to a guy that's on the road, and that's pretty much what we thought about back then, but we had no idea it was going to turn into the monster it is today, that's for sure.
You're up to date on GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens. Now let's get back to Emily.
Welcome back to Real Britain with me, Emily Carver. So here's what's coming up on the show. RMT General Secretary Mick Lynch is back. He says the winter strikes will go ahead. But it's not just trains. Thousands of workers across many sectors of the economy, including at Heathrow Airport, nurses, postal staff and ambulance employees have announced strike action during the festive period. Then, as former Chancellor and Health Secretary Sajid Javid becomes the latest Tory MP to announce he will stand down at the next general election, I'll be asking, is it the case of I'm a Tory, get me out of here? And according to one female football fan, the alcohol ban helps female fans enjoy hassle-free football in Qatar. She'll join me later on to discuss why. So that's what we've got to talk about for the next hour. I'd love to know your thoughts on all of that. Do you think the Conservative Party is basically finished? They all seem to be jumping ship at least. Tweet me at GB News, let me know what you think. Or you can email me on gbviews@gbnews.uk. Of course, you can watch us online too on YouTube. Thank you very much for watching. We'll be back in a second. Oh dear. Is anyone else finding our tell-all culture ever so slightly tedious? In the same week as the ever so hard done by Prince and Princess of Montecito gifted us their Netflix trailer, a glimpse into their upcoming fly-on-the-wall docu-series, the disgraced former Health Secretary Matt Hancock, fresh home from his lucrative stint in the jungle, is blessing us again with his pandemic diary. What a time to be alive. This diary will supposedly reveal his side of the story. A story that will be released just in time for Christmas stocking fillers, with part 1 published in the Daily Mail today, alongside, of course, yet another cringeworthy sit-down tell-all video interview. He's asking us, yet again, for forgiveness, that he only broke the rules he forced upon each and every one of us because he fell in love, attempting to justify his adultery as if he's some hapless, randy teenager unable to control his urges, rather than a fully grown man tasked with leading us out of a pandemic. One might think that the way to win back the hearts and minds of the public would be to dedicate the rest of his political career to the people, the constituents he's supposedly there to represent. But no, instead, he cleanses his soul in public. And it would seem an unfortunate number of us are more than happy to lap it up. He came third in I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here, after all. So Mr. Hancock will clean up with what's reported to be millions of pounds, while the rest of us, back in real Britain, are left picking up the cost of his disastrous lockdown policies, the policies he himself thought he was too big, important and besotted to follow. They get to move on from their mistakes and make shed loads of money in the process, while we live with the consequences. At the same time, the awkward duo, Chris Whitty and Patrick Vallance, have doubled down on the righteousness of their lockdown policies in a new report. They did, though, warn that we face a prolonged period of excess deaths due to lockdown effects. I don't remember that appearing on one of their endlessly tedious slideshows. Officials are now warning that lockdown policies could have left many of us with weakened immune systems, impacting those who are least at risk of COVID, children. 6 children have now died of Strep A this winter. What is usually a mild bug, but can, in the most severe cases, be lethal, is nearly 5 times higher among infants than before COVID struck. Scientists have said the decision to close schools and keep children apart during lockdown left a wider pool of youngsters without immunity to the bacteria. Who could have possibly foreseen that might come to be? Just like Meghan and Harry, who likely never admit they too may have played a part in the breakdown of their relationship with the royal family, it appears those responsible for some of the most authoritarian policies our countries have ever faced, and decisions that cost lives and will continue to cost lives are doing all they can to make the most of their newfound fame. It seems we love a tell-all in this country, but we're also smart. Certainly smart enough to see through the shameless self-promotion. So that's what I think. Let me know. I am so fed up of all these tell-alls. It seems that you can cleanse your soul on the public stage and all is forgiven, but I, for one, don't buy it. Anyway, we've got quite the winter ahead. From rail workers to nurses, university lecturers to postmen, tens of thousands of workers across key sectors are set to walk out this month as they seek better pay and working conditions. In fact, the strikes are now so widespread that the country is going to face at least a strike a day in the run-up to Christmas, with the army now being put on standby to prop up the NHS. The Times are reporting that nurses are preparing to walk out of A&Es and refuse to provide cancer treatment during 2 days of NHS strikes before Christmas. Rail Minister Hugh Merriman met with the RMT General Secretary Mick Lynch this week to try and negotiate an end to the December strikes. But yesterday, the TSSA union announced more strikes in a further 6 train operating companies. That's in light of warnings the action will cost the economy over $1.7 billion. Action from Network Rail and 14 train companies is currently set to start next Tuesday. Now, to give their thoughts on this, we've got Socialist Party industrial organiser and trade unionist Rob Williams and the ever-erudite political commentator Emma Webb. Thank you very much for joining me. So, Rob, thank you for joining us from outside, it seems. So, across the country, people are all suffering, really, with the result of the cost of living crisis. Are you worried that these strikes may compound matters?
No, I think the strikes, if anything, are going to make things better because unless workers fight, then unfortunately the cost of living squeeze is going to get more severe. We've already heard stories about food banks in hospitals. Bear that in mind. Think about that. So, no, actually, the cost of living crisis is a catastrophe. It's not going to get any better unless workers fight. And what we are seeing is that when workers are taking action, then they are winning pay rises. And those are the pay rises that is going to keep the roof over their head, is going to keep the heating on over this winter. And that's what all workers need at the moment.
But don't you accept also that the whole entire country, including those in the public sector and also those working in the private sector, pensioners, etc. alike, are all suffering the consequences of inflation? Do you consider that perhaps there isn't simply the money to pay for inflation-busting pay rises?
Well, I tell you, it's not the case that everyone's in the same boat. Not if you're a chief executive, that I've heard the average wage of them is something like £4 million a year. Not if you talk about people like that, of big business, etc. They're doing very nice, thank you very much. Not the energy companies that are making record profits. So, yes, the vast majority of people are suffering. And that's why I think the strike action that's being taken is popular, and that will be popular. And I think that is why when nurses are forced to take action, just remember this, the Royal College of Nursing, this is the first time they will ever take action in England and Wales. It's the last thing they want to do. But they've had a fifth of their income taken away in the last 12 years. They've got no option, and working class people and working class communities are fully behind them.
Now, Emma, you're a supporter of workers' rights, by and large, I would imagine. Do you think that there isn't a strong case here that NHS workers, postal workers, railway workers deserve a bit of a bump for all their hard work?
Look, I think that nurses frontline workers, of course, I think they should be paid more. In fact, I think that the NHS needs serious reform, trimming off that fat from the top from those who are working in jobs like equality and inclusion, diversity roles, and giving that money to the hospital porters, to the nurses, absolutely. But I think that this is ultimately cutting off our nose to spite our face, whether these are workers in the public sector or in the private sector. In the private sector, they're damaging the economy, and the businesses that they work for, which affects the amount of money that is available to go around. In the public sector, everybody across the board is facing a really hard time right now. And when we hear from nurses, and like I said, I do think that nurses should be paid more, but I don't think that they should necessarily any workers whose job puts people's lives at risk if they're not able to do it properly. I'm not sure whether they should even be allowed to strike in this way. The idea that we've been told that this isn't going to affect patient care is nonsense, because otherwise the strike would make no sense at all. So I think people's lives will be put at risk by this. It's the same with firefighter strikes. Obviously, different sectors need to be spoken about separately and distinctively. But, ultimately, I think that we will see what public opinion is on this, because I think it will be fair to say that all of those working class people, particularly the self-employed, who will be very, very badly hit by all of these strikes, I don't think this is going to be popular at all. I think it's going to be a disaster for the country.
Now, Rob, isn't that the point? The nurses, for example, we were told by the union there that nobody's lives would be put at risk. But now we hear today that the Royal College of Nursing is saying that cancer wards, maternity care, all could be impacted. They won't be excluded from this strike action. Lives will be put at risk. The Times have done an analysis that shows hundreds of thousands of appointments, hundreds of thousands of operations could be delayed even further. Should you not be arguing for a reform of the NHS rather than for further strike action?
Well, first of all, I think nursing unions and health unions will put emergency cover on. But of course, the issue is, isn't it, is that
Rob, can I just interrupt there? Can I just interrupt?
Let me make this point
very quickly.
And what I'm saying is that operations are cancelled now. People are dying now because the NHS is in a catastrophic position. And when you say there should be reform, yes, there should be reform. But the reform that needs to happen is to reverse the erosion of the health service, the bringing in of the private sector. When it's been raised just now that we trim the fat from the top, then what that means is getting rid of the private sector and the high-paid managers, the senior managers in the NHS.
Okay, basically,
and the erosion of the NHS services. What we need to do is reinstitute the NHS as the body that it has been, and those health workers are fighting to defend.
Yes, well, Emma, I think the key issue here, so a lot of people have a lot of respect for nurses, of course, respect for rail workers, respect for postal workers, but the problem is that their business models aren't working. If you look at Royal Mail, if you look at their business model, for example, they're apparently losing £1 million per day, and yet those workers who are striking aren't willing to change their working practices. Same with the rail workers. Is all this striking not rather self-defeating, that it may actually lead to more redundancies because of the amount of money that's lost by this type of action?
Emily, you've nailed it completely. And I think the issue with the NHS is a serious, entrenched problem with inefficiency. Just throwing more money at the NHS isn't going to solve this problem. It clearly needs radical reform. And that will be in the best interests also of the staff, particularly the nurses and those doctors working on the front line, because the current way of doing things is not sustainable. But these strikes are not going to help. They're going to actually make the situation worse.
Yes. I think you're right. Thank you very much for joining me. That was Socialist Party industrial organiser and trade unionist Rob Williams.
Solidarity to the nurses.
And political commentator Emma Webb, thank you very much both for your time. Now, plenty more to come this afternoon on Real Britain. What do you think about those strikes? Do you still have sympathy? After the break, as former Chancellor and Health Secretary Sajid Javid becomes the latest Tory MP to announce he will stand down at the next general election, I'll be asking, are they abandoning the Tory sinking ship? But first, let's have a look at the weather. Stay tuned.
Looking ahead to this evening's weather, and the UK is looking cold but cloudy for most, with showers affecting eastern areas. Let's take a look at the details. It will be mostly dry across southwestern England, with a mix of clear spells and scattered showers, chiefly across Devon and Cornwall, and a keen wind will make it feel rather cold. A northeasterly breeze across the southeast will make it feel cold, with coasts being particularly exposed. It will remain rather cloudy but dry. It'll be cloudy across Wales, but a few outbreaks are possible, particularly in the west, and there is an outside chance of an isolated shower or two, but it will be mostly dry. Across the Midlands on Saturday evening, it will be dry, rather cloudy, but with clear spells, especially in the west. There is a chance of a few showers, mainly in the east, and it will feel cold everywhere. An easterly wind will feed showers westwards across northeast England, and some of these will be heavy and turn wintry in the highest peaks later. Rain and drizzle will slowly clear west across northwest Scotland throughout the evening. Elsewhere, it's generally cloudy with some clear spells and isolated showers affecting the far east coast. A few showers will continue to affect eastern coasts of Northern Ireland. Most places, though, will remain dry with clear spells developing, feeling chilly overnight with lows of 4 degrees Celsius. Overnight, we'll see further showers, mainly in the east, but drier further west, and that's how the weather's shaping up overnight into tomorrow morning.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio, and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, We're
on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
It's something that you would never want anyone to suffer.
I didn't know what channels there were. B, I didn't think I'd be believed.
I must have weighed about 7 stone and I'm 5'8".
My instincts was to sort of cover this up. I mean, clearly that was a mistake.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Yes, welcome back to Real Britain with me, Emily Carver, on GB News, on TV, online and on your digital radio. Now, former Chancellor and Home Secretary Sajid Javid has announced that he will stand down as an MP at the next election, becoming the 13th sitting Conservative MP to do so. Meanwhile, earlier today, it was revealed that Tory MP Conor Burns has had the whip restored after he was sacked as Trade Minister in October, following an allegation of serious misconduct. And to discuss this, I'm joined in the studio by GB News political reporter Catherine Forster. So can you give me a bit of a rundown? Why has Saj decided to, make this decision?
Well, it was obviously, it came hot on the heels of the Chester by-election result, but it was rumoured for a while that he was thinking of standing down, though his team had denied it. And I suppose, well, I guess he can see which way the wind appears to be blowing. He's the 13th to say that he's not going to stand again. But obviously, he's the first super high profile. But really, I suppose, he's been in the cabinet for most of the time since 2010 when he came in. He's had various big offices of state, including most obviously Chancellor. He was Chancellor before Rishi Sunak came in when he resigned. And he's run for leadership twice, most noticeably just 5 months ago, unsuccessfully. And I suppose he thinks, well, where do I go from here? And he's only 52. He's come from the city. He's already apparently
Maybe he'll make his way back.
offers. There's talks about going back to the city. And I guess that's very tempting.
Now, am I right in thinking that out of the 13 Tory MPs that have decided to stand down at the next election, are they mostly new Tory MPs that were elected at the last election, or is it a real mixture?
It's a real mix. I mean, you've got people like Charles Walker, who's been an MP for a long time, right through to somebody like Dehenna Davison, who only came in 2019, who's only 29. But what is quite noticeable about it, I think, is the age. They're really quite young. You know, you'd expect there's about 12 Labour MPs have said they're not going to stand again, but they're mostly over 60. They're people like Dame Margaret Hodge, Harriet Harman. That's understandable. But some of the Conservatives, and William Bragg, he's only 34. Chloe Smith, that was recently Work and Pensions Secretary, she's only 40. So these are people that could have had long political careers ahead of them.
Could it be that they're sort of fair weather politicians, that they quite enjoyed it when Boris had that massive bounce? They haven't been sure of who they want to be the Prime Minister, who they want leading their party, having ousted Boris and then, of course, Liz Truss. Could it be that it's just a little bit difficult? It's a bit tricky at the moment, so they'd rather sort of crack on with something else where they could possibly earn more money?
Yes, I think so. And also, I think they're exhausted. I mean, they've been, when you think of what we've been through, Scottish referendum, multiple general elections, multiple Conservative leaders, the Brexit vote, and just this year alone, 3 prime ministers. It's a lot. So, yes, they're looking and they're thinking, well, I'm quite likely to lose my seat in 2 years, so perhaps I'll start thinking now about what I'm going to do. But of course, for the Conservative Party, it's not a good look, is it? Rishi
It's a terrible look.
Desperate to unite the party behind him and try somehow or other to steer them towards a possible, it doesn't look very likely, but victory in 2 years' time. But at the moment, it looks likely that Labour will win. And the more MPs say, well, actually, I'm not going to bother standing again, the more likely that becomes.
Yes, it's not a great look, particularly when I think Rishi Sunak's approval ratings are pretty rock bottom, of course, not as low as Liz Truss's were. I must ask you quickly about Conor Burns, because that is the breaking news today. His whip has been restored, or the whip has been restored to him.
Yes, so he was sacked as Trade Minister back in October and had the whip removed immediately. It was an allegation that he'd touched a young man's thigh at Conservative Party conference. Now, the complaint was not made by the person whose thigh he had touched. It was made by somebody who'd witnessed it. And Wendy Morton, who was Chief Whip at the time, acted extremely quickly. Very keen, I suppose, to have a sort of zero tolerance approach. Too quickly, as it's turned out, because now the investigation has found that he has no case to answer. And he has been to hell and back, he says, over the last 2 months. Now he's been reinstated. But I think it is worth saying that there's allegations now in the last couple of days about another unnamed Conservative MP, that a group of Conservative MPs have complained about various allegations of sexual misconduct, including rape. And that MP is still currently a member of the Conservative Party and still walking around Parliament.
Goodness me, it's not looking very good for the Conservative Party these days. What with Tory MPs jumping ship and allegations of rape and sexual misconduct, things could be looking a little brighter for them. Thank you very much for joining us in the studio today. That was Catherine Forster, of course, our political editor, political reporter. I can't remember your exact title. Thank you very much. You're with GB News, of course, on TV and DAB radio. After the break, according to one female football fan, the alcohol ban in Qatar helps female fans enjoy hassle-free football. She'll join me later on to discuss why. Do you think football matches should be booze-free, or is that the nanny state gone mad? Let me know. Surely we shouldn't be taking any lessons from Qatar on women's rights anyway. Let me know what you think, but first it's time to check on the news headlines. We'll be back in just a tick.
Emily, thank you. Good afternoon. It's 2:32. I'm Bethany Elsey in the GB newsroom. Parents are being urged to be vigilant and look out for symptoms of Strep A after 6 children under the age of 10 have died from the infection in the UK. Symptoms are usually mild, but the UK Health Security Agency is now investigating the rise in severe cases. Experts say that a lack of mixing during the COVID-19 pandemic could be behind a drop in immunity. A wealthy Russian businessman has been arrested on suspicion of money laundering, conspiracy to defraud the Home Office and conspiracy to commit perjury. The 58-year-old was arrested at his multi-million-pound home in London by a specialist police unit investigating oligarchs. 2 other men were also arrested in connection with the money laundering. All 3 have since been released on bail. In a tweet responding to the arrests, Security Minister Tom Tugendhat said, "We will defend our democracy and hunt the Kremlin's criminals." Police have charged a 3rd person with murder after 2 teenage boys were fatally stabbed in south-east London last weekend. 18-year-old Hussein Bah has been charged with murder after 2 16-year-olds were stabbed to death just a mile apart. 2 others, aged 16 and 15, appeared at Bexley Magistrates Court yesterday, charged with murder, and they were both remanded in youth custody. And today marks 30 years since the first ever text message was sent. 1 in 3 people still send and receive SMS messages every day. The first text was sent by engineer Neil Papworth in December 1992. It read, "Merry Christmas." You're up to date on TV, online and DAB+ radio. This is GB News. Don't go anywhere. Emily will be back in just a moment.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Mark Stein. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
Why not take us home with you by visiting the GB News shop at gbnews.store. You'll find all the official merchandise, a really good present actually for yourself, your friends or your family.
We ship across the UK mainland at no extra cost. GB News, the People's Channel.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
The guy went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions.
I have no time for cultural totalitarianism.
We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Welcome back to Real Britain with me, Emily Carver, on GB News, on TV, online and on your digital radio. Now, Brexit. According to a study by the Centre for Economic Performance, leaving the EU has added £210 to the average British food bill over the 2 years to the end of 2021. The team behind the study said that their findings confirmed that Brexit alone had increased food prices by 6%, and since lower-income families spend a greater proportion of their income on food, they were being hit hardest by Britain's decision to leave the EU. But is the study right? To discuss this, I'm joined by the former Labour Minister for Europe, Denis McShane. Denis, have you looked at this report? Have you looked at the methodology?
Yes, it's the London School of Economics. I don't normally
My alma mater.
Oh, well, there we are. I'm with very clever LSE-trained people. It seems about right. bear in mind, it stops at the end of 2021. So this is pre-pandemic. I mean, food prices have been messed up by the pandemic. Sunflower oil is going up, grain is going up, lots of things are getting more scarce. Or the very hot summer, so potatoes are pricier. Bird flu, that's costing a rise in prices for chickens and turkeys. But, yes, it's the old Brexit love affair with red tape. I mean, Brexit equals red tape. More forms to fill in. OK for supermarkets, they can pay a super-duper form filler online, but for lots and lots of the lovely shops we go to that import things from Europe, that means forms.
Now, I'm not denying, as a Brexit voter, I must admit that. I have some skin in the game, as it were. I must say that, now I've had a little look at this data that they've used, and this was a report that was actually published back in April as well, and has sort of reappeared in the press this week, that actually food price inflation between December 2019 and December 2021 was 2.9% in the UK, and that was lower than in the euro area, where it was 4.5%. I would query whether they know that inflation in food prices in the UK has been down to non-tariff barriers brought on by Brexit, or whether it's just total guesswork that's impossible to tell, considering the fact that we've gone through such circumstances with the pandemic, energy prices and whatnot.
Well, that's perfectly fair, but you're the LSE graduate, Emily, not me. I mean, I couldn't even write up my expenses correctly. So you could have an
I would hazard a guess that it has an agenda.
I don't think so. I mean, their job is challenged by everybody. When Mark Carney, for example, said something about Britain is poorer than Germany, a very well-known economist, Professor Portes of King's College, jumped down his throat and sort of monstered him and destroyed him. But Portes is a great pro-European, but here he is trashing a man who was sort of advancing the Brexit case. No, I mean, we've got even problems right now. There's a report again this week that the government has imported several 100,000, 2,000 Indonesian workers all the way from Indonesia. Costs $4,500 a head to bring them here. Why? To pick vegetables and fruit and prepare it, because you won't find a Brit doing that job.
But isn't that something we need to address? I think most people, so we've got a People's poll that we're going to be coming to later. The majority of people think that immigration is too high to this country, particularly off the back of those astonishing net migration figures. And I think a lot of people are thinking, you know what? We need to start focusing on the people who are here. And if people aren't doing these jobs, well, perhaps they should.
That would be wonderful, but we've never, ever, throughout British history, or probably back into the 18th century or something, it used to be, forgive me, many people from Ireland who would come and do all of this work. And then, you know, when I was a younger man, before you were born, it was people from Pakistan or Bangladesh. And all of them go up the pay scale. They go to the LSE, they get professional jobs, do very well, like Rishi Sunak or Suella Braverman or Sajid Javid, and their children don't go into the fields again. So, but we've got the opportunity, if we want to take it, we don't want to take it, don't take it, but it'll be more expensive, to help ourselves to some of that poorer European labour market pool. You're not going to get a very small horticultural farmer just producing cucumbers or leeks to pay £20 an hour to get them dug out of the ground. It's QED, and this is where really that part of Brexit, you know, we voted to leave the treaty, that's fair enough, it's just we're cutting our own throats.
Away from the free movement argument, which of course there are many pros and cons of such a policy, and lots of people do lament losing free movement as one of the conditions of Brexit. But I think a lot of people get annoyed that there doesn't seem to be a lot of perspective from some of the most ardent Remainers who continue to fight the last battles. Because if you look at Germany, for example, their food inflation is running at about 20%, which is quite a bit higher than it is in this country. Now, that can't be because of Brexit. I don't believe Germany gets much of its food from Britain, so they won't be impacted by those non-tariff barriers. So, you know, I think when we look at Britain, we always seem to talk it down rather than talk about the opportunities that we do have.
Emily, 20%, that seems to me to be very, very high. I haven't been in Germany for... No, I'm not disputing your figure at all, but just as you were disputing the LSE report, the LSE graduate, ich spreche sehr gut Deutsch, ich kenne Deutschland, I know Germany. I was in Paris last week, I'm going to Brussels this coming week, and I always I always go into supermarkets, you seem to buy, one or two little things you can't get so easily or cheaply here. And yes, I notice food price inflation.
Yeah.
Nobody is denying that at all. But actually, the problem really is that nobody, if I may put it, your side of the family or the camp or the LSE Graduate Association, none of you are defending Brexit anymore. I'm not. I didn't know anything about this food thing until I read about it in the
I'm
papers.
defending Brexit.
Well,
I mean,
you are.
what Brexit has achieved is to show is essentially that our domestic government it can no longer be off the hook and blame Brussels for anything that goes wrong in our country, which I think is a good thing.
That is true.
Hold
but
them to account.
We were told that Brexit would cut inflation. It's just had the biggest.
Well, hang on, that's unfair.
Well, I'm sorry. I don't want to fight 2016. I'm thinking of 2026, when there'll be a review of the current withdrawal treaty, the Trade and Cooperation Treaty. I think there's a fair chance there'll be a new government. I don't know. I'm a Labour guy, but, believe me, I never count
It's
votes
looking that way.
until they're cast. Now, that may be. Right now, the CBI, the British Chamber of Commerce, they're all moaning. It's a sort of low-level permanent whine, isn't it? But they don't want to attack their friends. Most of them are naturally more conservative-leaning, and I hope Mr Sunak will be a much better Prime Minister than his two predecessors. But I think when there's a Labour government in, I think all bets will be off. And I think you'll find business, the British Chamber of Commerce, and the Daily Mail and the Sun blaming Sir Keir Starmer as Prime Minister when food prices go up and people can't travel. And suddenly people will say, oh, well, Brexit, well, that happened 10 years ago, in a different decade, and Britain will move on.
But this is where Keir Starmer, now I don't wish to be rude, but perhaps is ever so slightly duplicitous, because we all remember Keir Starmer, or at least most of us will remember, most of our viewers, I'm sure, will remember that he was very much a champion of a second referendum. He did want to thwart the result. He would have liked the result very much to have been different, and he made that clear, and he thought that the British people should have another go at it, voting.
OK.
That's to say, I would hazard a guess that if he, like the LSE have done with this report, that he will attempt to bring Britain very much closer to the European Union, if not back to some kind of...
My goodness, you're not reading anything he says, or you're not reading my inbox from pro-Europeans who are furious with Sir Keir, saying he's no different from Boris Johnson. He's saying keep saying it. I mean, keep saying it. Rishi Sunak never wants to mention Europe because he never wants to answer a question on Europe. We understand that. But Sir Keir pops up almost every occasion to say, no free movement, no single market, no customs union, you all have to go away and sort out all these problems. And I think on the contrary now, sure, there was a Labour Party policy at the time. I argued in The Guardian against putting all the eggs in the second referendum basket. Why, Emily? Because I think if there had been a second referendum 2 years ago or last year, the British people would have voted the same way. They don't like being taken for granted. But, I've got no influence over Labour Party policy. That was Jeremy Corbyn policy. And the one thing we know, I mean, I don't know if Mr Corbyn's still even in the Labour Party. He's been stopped from standing as a candidate by Sir Keir Starmer. I mean, you should read the complaints by Michael Crick, the very famous political reporter. He is going cross on Twitter, saying Starmer is a Stalinist. He's stopping all the left wing from standing.
But I just think, we look at the European Union, and a lot of commentators over here in Britain like to say that we're in a uniquely terrible position when it comes to a lot of things, whether it comes to our economy in general, whether it comes to attitudes in this country, whether it comes to trade, etc., inflation and whatnot. And it just doesn't stand up to the evidence. If you actually look at the data, I mean, I just mentioned that food inflation in Germany is much higher. We talk about how inflation is going up. We talk about how the energy crisis is impacting countries. Germany was reliant 45% the other day on coal for its electricity generation. It's not all sunny uplands, is it, in the EU, but it could very well be for us as a free trading nation around the world.
Well, Look, I mean, for my pains, I spent 15 years before I became an MP. I had to go into exile when your heroine, she might be your heroine, Margaret Thatcher, was elected.
I have no heroines.
I had to leave the country, so I worked in Switzerland, Germany, and France, learnt the languages, and I couldn't agree with you more. I've written 4 books on Brexit, and all of them insist Europe, and even talking about the EU is daft. There's France, there's the Netherlands, there's Spain, there's Germany, there's Sweden, there's Greece. Countries are completely different one from the other. There's no homogenous EU out there. Now, the fact is that our electric vehicle production now is being transferred out of this country. Our British Volt battery factory won't be built. The Paris Bourse, that's the Paris Stock Exchange, now is more valuable than the London Stock Exchange. This is small stuff.
Well, actually, I would also query that, but we're going to have to move on. Thank you very much for taking such a nice section of your day out for GB News.
Pleasure.
And thank you very much for joining us. We won't agree on Brexit. And please, can you tell the Remainers on Twitter to stop being so nasty? They really can be, you know. They have a little troop and they bully people like me.
You should. Well, I'm too old to be bullied, but you should see the stuff I get from.
Well, I get very nasty stuff, but I wouldn't blame it on misogyny, of course. Of course, I wouldn't play the gender card. Thank you very much. That, of course, was Dennis McShane, former Labour Minister for Europe there, talking about Brexit and whether it's led to further inflation in this country. Now, completely moving on to another subject, but staying international, female football fans who have gone to Qatar to watch the World Cup say that they have been pleasantly surprised by how little sexist abuse they have been subjected to, which some are attributing to the decision by the country's royal family to ban the sale of alcohol around stadiums. The lack of football hooliganism in Qatar has led to Chief Constable Mark Roberts, who's in charge of the UK's football policing, saying that the government should not ease restrictions on the sale of alcohol at football games in the UK. OK, so to give her thoughts is Ellie Mollison from the Her Game Too campaign, who is actually out in Qatar for us. Ellie, so please can you tell me what it's been like as a young female football fan over in Qatar?
It's been really good, actually. Like I say, I was expecting things to be quite, given what it said in the media, I was expecting things to be dangerous, but I've come here and I've experienced no sexist abuse. I've not had any catcalling, no wolf whistling, none of the sort, which obviously is something quite different to sometimes when you walk the streets in the UK. And it was really eye-opening for me. In the stadiums, there's been absolutely no hostility whatsoever as far as the games that I've been to, which again is something a little bit different. There is a bit of a trade-off, obviously, with the lack of hostility. It means there is not so much banter as we're used to in Britain. So the atmosphere is definitely not as fun, not as bouncy. But it has been really eye-opening for me and just shocked me completely when I arrived here.
Now, Ellie, I must challenge you on something because you've painted a pretty nice picture of how it is out there, but I'm sure you know that things for women in Qatar aren't particularly rosy in many respects. They need male guardians in order to make basic decisions. I believe they were only allowed to drive without male permission only 2 years ago, and of course, there are many ways in which women are downtrodden, one might say, in Qatar. Do you think perhaps Qatar is putting on a bit of a facade here, trying to show that they're an open country, but actually it's much more sordid underneath?
I think in terms of the area I'm talking about like the sexual harassment and things like that, I don't think that's the facade. I think it can be said in other ways, like, you know, really showcasing things like wanting a female referee and other parts, but in terms of what I've noticed, I think that is genuinely, and I could be wrong, I don't live here, my experiences, I feel like that is the culture here. I guess it makes sense. It's very much look, don't touch culture, which is really nice. If people do make any advances, it's very, very respectful. But like you say, I cannot pretend or ignore the experiences of locals here. I cannot speak for them, but I'm not taking away what they've gone through. I can only tell you, as a travelling female fan, what my experience has been. And I think a lot of the media has ignored that and made out, for example, that you can't get alcohol anywhere. You can. If you want to go drink, there are plenty of bars outside. And as a female travelling fan, I feel very, very safe here.
Thank you very much. I would have loved to have spoken to you for longer and really drill into that alcohol, but we must end the discussion there, the interview there. Thank you very much for joining me all the way from Qatar. That was Ellie Mollison from the Her Game 2 campaign. Please do enjoy the rest of your time in Qatar. I'm not so sure if we should be taking lessons from Qatar, of course, although we did, as someone just reminded me in my inbox, take lessons from the Chinese Communist Party when it came to lockdown policies. So perhaps we will end up doing so. Anyway, we're going to be moving on to a health matter. The UK Health Security Agency has said that 6 children have died with a Strep A infection since September, with the 7th child currently fighting for her life in Liverpool. Strep A infections are normally mild, with symptoms such as a sore throat or skin infection, but can cause scarlet fever and can therefore be fatal. The infection remains uncommon, but the UK Health Security Agency is urging parents nonetheless who are concerned about their children's symptoms to seek medical advice. To tell us more is Dr. Bharat Pankhania, I believe that's how you pronounce your name, senior clinical lecturer at the University of Exeter Medical School. Now, Doctor, would you tell us a little bit about this infection, this disease? I've never heard of it myself before it was in the news this week.
Okay, my pleasure. So this is an infection caused by a bacteria, and the bacteria's name is Group A Streptococcus. And this group of bacteria, they have different strains of it, cause a series of different infections that we're all aware of. Let me sort of elucidate. So you may be aware of things like cellulitis. That's also caused by Group A Streptococcus. Same as impetigo, young children get that yellow crusting skin infection. Scarlet fever, we've just mentioned. Severe streptococcal throat. And then, of course, you can get that toxic shock syndrome from the same bacteria. So what it is, it's a range of ailments. Unfortunately, in rare circumstances, it can go on to become a toxic shock whereby you need life support or you may even die.
Now, why is this particular infection impacting such young children? Why do you think the rate of infections has increased so substantially? So, in comparison to last year, we had 4 deaths. And this year, unfortunately, we've got 6 deaths. A number of factors could be at play. And the ones that I'm thinking about and looking into are as follows. So it could be that we have a more virulent strain of Group A Streptococcus, i.e. a virulent strain that likes to become invasive. So when I worked at Public Health England, we followed up every case of IGAS, as we call it, invasive Group A Streptococcus. And what we're trying to do is see if there is a more invasive, more disease-causing strain of Group A Streptococcus. The other one could be that are we ignoring the complaint of I have a sore throat, I am unwell, and discarding it as this is viral and taking no action. So both could be at play. Maybe some other factor is at play. The last factor that I was talking about is as follows. It's very difficult to tell if you have a viral sore throat or you have a bacterial sore throat. If it is a viral sore throat, antibiotics don't work. On the other hand, if it is bacterial, we can give you the penicillin platform of antibiotics, and they work very well. Let me, for the benefit of our viewers, listeners, elucidate a little bit more about how to tell the difference. So if you have got a bacterial sore throat, which may go on to develop into scarlet fever, which may develop into toxic shock, the main signs and symptoms are you have extremely painful swollen lymph nodes in your neck, and your tonsils are red raw and they may have an exudate. You have a temperature of greater than 38 degrees, and you will feel really tired, and you may have what we call a rash. We call it a sandpaper rash. It starts in your groin, up your trunk, down your arms, and it looks very sandpaperish. Yeah. And finally, you may also have a strawberry tongue
all those are features of a bacterial infection. Whereas if it is a viral infection, and I finish as soon as I've done this, if it is a viral one, you have the following symptoms and signs: a cough, a runny nose, a reddening of the eyes, and a hoarse voice. So if that is the case, that's more likely to be viral. And if it is not, it's more bacterial. I hope that makes sense.
Yes, thank you, Doctor. That was very useful, I'm sure, to our viewers who might be concerned by this news, of course. I must ask you, though, scientists have been saying that the increase in the rate of cases of this particular infection may be down to the fact that children were not mixing as much and were not building up their immunity because of school closures, because of the lockdowns. Surely you would potentially agree with that?
No, I don't, not at all. If there was any evidence for me to think that this is an immunological factor whereby the children are now suboptimally immune, I would say so. I have no reason not to share all that information with you. I'm saying it as it is. I have no evidence that as a result of lockdowns, etc., that we are in a state of reduced immunity.
But how can we not be, considering the fact that people weren't spreading and mixing other viruses around?
Let me expand. So it's great to have this discussion. So these are bacteria, and at this time of the year, we do see more of these bacterial infections, and that is the case. In other words, there is nothing fundamentally different this year compared to previous years. The only bit that is different is, unfortunately, we've had 6 deaths compared to 4 last year. But if you look at the evidence for streptococcal infections in the country, it is on par with previous years. So it's no different. It's no different from previous years.
Thank you very much. I must stop the interview there, but thank you very much for coming on and explaining all those symptoms to us so concisely. That was Dr. Bharat Pankhania, Senior Clinical Lecturer at the University of Exeter Medical School. Thank him very much for his time. Now, you're watching Real Britain. Here is your latest weather forecast. Stay tuned.
Looking ahead to this evening's weather, and the UK is looking cold but cloudy for most, with showers affecting eastern areas. Let's take a look at the details. It will be mostly dry across southwestern England, with a mix of clear spells and scattered showers, chiefly across Devon and Cornwall, and a keen wind will make it feel rather cold. A northeasterly breeze across the southeast will make it feel cold, with coasts being particularly exposed. It will remain rather cloudy but dry. It'll be cloudy across Wales, but a few outbreaks are possible, particularly in the west, and there is an outside chance of an isolated shower or two, but it will be mostly dry. Across the Midlands on Saturday evening, it will be dry, rather cloudy, but with clear spells, especially in the west. There is a chance of a few showers, mainly in the east, and it will feel cold everywhere. An easterly wind will feed showers westwards across northeast England, and some of these will be heavy and turn wintry in the highest peaks later. Rain and drizzle will slowly clear west across northwest Scotland throughout the evening. Elsewhere, it's generally cloudy with some clear spells and isolated showers affecting the far east coast. A few showers will continue to affect eastern coasts of Northern Ireland. Most places, though, will remain dry with clear spells developing, feeling chilly overnight with lows of 4 degrees Celsius. Overnight, we'll see further showers, mainly in the east, but drier further west, and that's how the weather's shaping up overnight into tomorrow morning.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us. We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing. You see, amazing.
You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Join me, Nana Akue, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel.
Welcome back. This is Real Britain with me, Emily Carver, on your TV, radio and online. Now, we're going to be taking a closer look at our GB News People's Poll, which finds the majority of Brits think immigration to the UK is too high. We'll be going to that in just a moment, but let's get your latest news headlines first with Bethany.
Emily, thank you. Good afternoon. It's 3:03. I'm Bethany Elsey in the GB newsroom. Parents are being urged to be vigilant and look out for symptoms as Strep A after 6 children under the age of 10 have died from the infection in the UK. Symptoms are usually mild, but the UK Health Security Agency is now investigating the rise in severe cases. Experts say that a lack of mixing during the COVID-19 pandemic could be behind a drop in immunity. Bacteriologist at the University of Aberdeen, Hugh Pennington, says spotting it early is key.
Because the disease, this severe manifestation of the disease, is so relatively rare, many doctors won't have seen a case, and they may not have that high index of suspicion. The good news is that treatment is straightforward with penicillin. This is not a bug that's developed antibiotic resistance like so many other bacteria. It's still sensitive to penicillin. The whole issue really is, can you get the penicillin in there quickly enough?
Well, NHS GP Dr. Veena Babu told GB News the symptoms some parents should look out for.
Strep A presents the most commonly in 3 ways. You can get sore throat, you can get scarlet fever, or you could get a condition called impetigo. So scarlet fever presents as muscle aches, fever. You may get a rash on the skin, which feels what we call your typical sandpaper rash. So you might get some bumps coming up on the skin, and that could be on the arms, on the chest, or on the tummy. I would advise parents, what we were saying, look, feel, and how your kids are feeding.
A wealthy Russian businessman has been arrested on suspicion of money laundering, conspiracy to defraud the Home Office, and conspiracy to commit perjury. The 58-year-old was arrested at his multi-million-pound home in London by a specialist police unit investigating oligarchs. 2 other men were also arrested in connection with the money laundering. All 3 have since been released on bail. In a tweet responding to the arrests, Security Minister Tom Tugendhat said, "We will defend our democracy and hunt the Kremlin's criminals." The EU, G7 and Australia have agreed a price cap on Russian oil in an effort to stop Moscow profiting from the energy crisis. The limit is $60 a barrel. On Friday, Russian crude oil was trading at around $67 a barrel. A senior aide to Ukraine's president says the price should be capped at $30 to hit Russia's economy harder. The Immigration Minister has defended the government's handling of migrants crossing the English Channel after more than 44,000 have reached British shores this year. Speaking to GB News, Robert Jenrick said stopping migrant crossings is a priority for the government. He also admitted it could cost the Conservatives at the next election if numbers aren't reduced. Mr Jenrick said UK and French authorities need to work together.
The Home Secretary signed a deal just a few weeks ago, which is an improvement on the situation, but it isn't the answer. It's certainly not a silver bullet. It does mean that there'll be more French officers on the beaches intercepting boats, but arrests are low, and it doesn't seem to break the people smugglers' business. So we're clearly going to have to go much further than that. Some of that will be diplomatic, and Rishi Sunak seems to have built a good rapport with President Macron, but a lot of it's going to be harder edged than that.
Police have charged a third person with murder after 2 teenage boys were fatally stabbed in southeast London last weekend. 18-year-old Hussein Bah has been charged with murder after 2 16-year-olds were stabbed to death just a mile apart. 2 others, aged 16 and 15, appeared at Bexley Magistrates Court yesterday, charged with murder, and they were both remanded in youth custody. Thousands of TSSA members are to walk out on the 17th of December in a dispute over jobs, pay and conditions. Services from 6 further train operators are expected to be affected, on top of the 2 previously announced. The union says its members feel they're being treated with contempt by train companies and the government, while the Department for Transport has urged unions and rail operators to work together to find a resolution. And today marks 30 years since the first ever text message was sent. 1 in 3 people still send and receive SMS messages every day. The first text was sent by engineer Neil Papworth in December 1992. It read, "Merry Christmas." He told GB News he didn't know it would turn into something so big.
Instead of carrying around a clunky analog phone and a pager on their hip, you'll be able to combine those 2 devices, and a secretary or something could send a message to a guy that's on the road, and that's pretty much what we thought about back then, but we had no idea it was going to turn into the monster it is today, that's for sure.
You're up to date on GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens now. Let's get back to Emily.
Thank you, Bethany. Now, welcome back to Real Britain with me, Emily Carver. So here's what's coming up on the second hour of the show. Our GB News People's poll revealed that the British people are fed up with immigration, with 54% of respondents saying they think immigration is too high in the UK. And later, William and Kate in the States, Harry and Meghan's docu-series, and a racism row at home. Royal commentator Michael Cole will join me to break down what has been a rather difficult week for the royal family. And later on this hour, the protests rocking both Iran and China blow apart the idea that autocracy is superior to democracy. Is Vladimir Putin's axis of evil crumbling around him? That's what we're talking about for the next hour. I'd love to know your thoughts on all of those questions. Do you think immigration is too high? Do you think Putin's axis of evil is crumbling? That's Iran and China, his supposed allies. Tweet me at GB News, or you can email me on gbviews@gbnews.uk. Of course, you can watch us online too on YouTube, and don't forget Facebook. You'll find lots of brilliant content on the GB News page. So it's time for GB News' latest People's Poll. The British people are fed up with immigration, it seems. That's according to our poll numbers. 54% of respondents in our GB News People's Poll think immigration to the UK is too high. That's after they were presented with last year's net migration numbers, which were over 500,000. Astonishing, really. 13% agree with the current level, whilst just 4% of respondents said the level of immigration is too low. 33% of the country think there is a need for a new party to lower immigration. That rises to 57% among people who voted Leave in 2016. Joining me to speak about all these things and more is Matt Goodwin, who conducted our People's Poll.
Good
Matt,
afternoon,
thank
Emily.
you for joining us. I'm just going to say to our viewers, if you don't follow Matt Goodwin already on his social media and on his various channels, you should do. He has some brilliant analysis of everyone's public opinion and all sorts, really, so do give him a follow. Matt, could you break down what the poll tells us about current views on immigration? Are they hardening again?
Well, I think it's interesting, Emily. On the one hand, after the Brexit referendum, we saw a bit of a relaxation in public attitudes on migration, and that was partly because of two things. One is people on the Remain side became more supportive of immigration, and people on the Leave side often felt more relaxed about immigration because they felt they finally got this control and immigration was going to be lowered. What we see today, I think, is still quite elevated levels of concern over this issue, particularly now after the pandemic, as the numbers have gone back up, as you say, to over 500,000. And today, in my mind at least, still a clear majority of the country feel that migration is too high, and only about 1 in 20 people feel that it's too low. So immigration is still very much at the front and centre of British politics.
It's quite extraordinary, really, because we see time and time again polling that shows that the public are concerned with levels of immigration, yet whoever's in government since the new Labour years have failed to do anything about it. It's almost as if they think they can sweep it under the carpet and none of us will notice the levels of immigration and the way that demographics are changing. Do you think that there is now more space than ever for a new anti-immigration or more conservative on immigration party to come to the fore?
Yeah, so I think this is something we've been looking at as well, that if you ask people, do you think actually there should be a political party that specifically campaigns to lower immigration into the country? About a third of the country say they would be open to that kind of party. More than half of Brexit voters would be open to it. And I think ultimately, look, what this comes down to is the fact that still lots of people feel that when you look at the main parties, there is this big consensus that basically the record levels that we now have been achieved under a Conservative government. There is a suspicion or scepticism that those numbers would change under Labour, given the legacy of New Labour. And I think that's why now you're beginning to see parties like Reform tick up a little bit in the opinion polls. They're up to just over 6%, an average of 6% in the polls. You're beginning to see a really big chunk, Emily, of those 2019 Conservatives now saying they're not really going to vote for anybody at the next election. So this apathy, this sense of disillusionment over where we've come to in British politics after all of the promise in the eyes of many people from that referendum, I think has led us here, which is this strong appetite for something different.
Yes, it does seem to be that people feel rather betrayed by both sides of the by both the government and the opposition, perhaps. Thank you very much, Matt. That was Matt Goodwin, pollster and Professor of Politics, bringing us up to date on that latest GBNews poll. So, joining me to debate the findings is Stephen Wolfe, who is Director of the Centre for Migration and Economic Prosperity, and Scarlett Maguire, who is a former Labour advisor. Now, Stephen, do the results of our People's Poll surprise you in any way?
Oh, absolutely not, because if you look in the UK, since 2016, on average, about 74% of polls that run through organisations such as Gallup have said that people are concerned about mass migration. But also, Gallup runs an international poll. It's called the Gallup World Index on Immigration. And if you look at that, that also shows that in almost every country in the world where immigration is increasing, then you'll find that people are becoming anti-immigrant. And if you take, for example, the 3 countries they use in their latest poll, Peru, Colombia, nations that we don't normally think about as receiving mass immigrants, are also concerned about it too. So globally, this has now become a mass concern for people living in their own countries who don't want to see large-scale immigration.
Stephen, do you think the general British public, are more nuanced in their views towards immigration than these polls reflect? For example, some people might have been very pro inviting Ukrainian refugees to this country, but they don't want to see large-scale, low-skilled immigration.
I think that was always the case. I mean, for example, my family background is that one of an Irish grandmother that came over when she was 14, a Jewish Black American and an English grandfathers. So I'm a product of people that have come to this country legally. Let's make that absolutely clear. So people believe that if you're a legal migrant that's come to this country, they think that you can share and enjoy the rights of everybody else. The biggest concern are for those that come over to this country illegally. But secondly, there is a deep concern by people, and it's shown in polling consistently, about having mass migration related to work, because we do know it pushes down wages for the poorest in society. And that's never changed. It's in across every international research that comes out, and the Bank of England did so on this. The World Bank have done this. So people are quite right to say that we're happy to have people come in, but not when it really impacts low-skilled migration and not when it's illegal.
Scarlett, we saw the quite astonishing figures of 1.1 million people coming in 1 year to this country, net migration at over 500,000. Do you think people are overreacting? Do you think there's a lot of xenophobes in this country who just don't want to be liberal to those from outside?
No, I mean, I think that the figures look quite scary to some people, but if you actually look at what's happening, so over a quarter of them are students, right? So and the reason the numbers are so high is because of COVID, and there are students coming back to do their things. And the thing about students is, one is we're getting the brightest and the best. Two is they mostly go home afterwards, and they go home actually loving this country, which is a really good thing. But possibly the most important thing is, without foreign students, our universities could not survive.
Scarlett, may I just butt in there and challenge you just on that point? Because if students were leaving, as you say they were, then surely that would be reflected in the net migration figures.
The reason the migration figures are so high this year is because so many students have come back after COVID, right? I mean, they do often leave afterwards, or they get the good jobs, right? Not from British people, but you know, they're going to be qualified. But we have to remember that our universities could not financially survive without foreign students. They just don't get enough money, and foreign students are much more. They pay far more than a domestic student. So that's one. The other is Ukrainians, right? Well, we know that most refugees who come over actually are hoping to go home. So, but we've invited the Ukrainians over. We've invited tens of thousands of Ukrainians, and then there are the Afghans that, frankly, we owe. I mean, most of the Afghans coming to this country, we've put in danger, and there are many more in Afghanistan that we've let down. So actually, once you look at the figures seriously, they're not frightening for other people.
Well, Stephen, I think I must say on the university question, I mean, there's been report after report and anecdotal evidence, certainly, of foreign students essentially getting their visas to join pretty poor quality courses. And then, of course, you are allowed in a lot of cases to bring dependents and whatnot. And, of course, that adds to the burdens on our public services. And we've been told time and time again that migration doesn't add doesn't cause extra pressure to our public services. No, don't worry at all. You know, more migrants work in the NHS than use the NHS. What are you on about? I think that most people see through that now. There must be an impact on our public services.
Well, let's just look at, and I will come and address Charlotte in a moment, but since 2010, net migration has introduced 3.28 million people to this country. They are from the EU and the non-EU, and they're exclusive of students, so it doesn't really have an impact from that. What you see with students in the net migration figures is generally there's only an excess of around 30,000 students that stay here that don't remain. So when you're looking at 500,000 people that have come here as net migration this year, the student numbers don't really have any impact on that at all. The big numbers this year were 371,000 people who received work visas, and of course those 178,000 that have come from the Ukraine. And it's very, very clear that when you put 3.28 million people into the country in the space of 12 years, There are massive impacts on housing. We know that because we get, with asylum alone, £6 million a day for hotels. We know that there are impacts on the NHS and health and education. There are impacts too on other areas that we don't really consider. Water, infrastructure costs, road and rail. All of that because we have an increase in population. And
yes, I guess you could argue, Stephen, that our government, that is government failure. Scarlett, very quickly before we sadly have to finish, what do you make of Keir Starmer's new narrative or rhetoric on immigration, the idea that he wants to wean the economy off cheap labour? Cheap labour.
I mean, I actually completely agree with Keir that what we should be doing is upskilling the British workforce. And it's not good enough that for years and years and years, we relied on skilled workers coming from Europe and Asia and Africa to be doctors in our health service, be nurses in our health service. We had Polish people coming over and doing the housing. I think it's really, really important that we upskill the British workforce so that they can get good jobs.
I do very much think that should be the priority of any government, whichever government we have in 2 years' time anyway. Thank you very much for that very pleasant debate. That was former Labour advisor Scarlett Maguire and, of course, Stephen Wolfe, director of the Centre for Migration and Economic Prosperity. Now, plenty more. Let me know what you think about that. Do you think immigration is too high? Do you have a more nuanced view, perhaps? Plenty more to come this afternoon on Real Britain with me, Emily Carver. After the break, William and Kate in the States, Harry and Meghan's docuseries, and a racism row at home. Royal commentator Michael Cole will join me to break down what has been a very difficult week for the royal family. But first, let's go to your weather. Stay tuned.
Looking ahead to this evening's weather, and the UK is looking cold but cloudy for most, with showers affecting eastern areas. Let's take a look at the details. It will be mostly dry across southwestern England, with a mix of clear spells and scattered showers, chiefly across Devon and Cornwall, and a keen wind will make it feel rather cold. A northeasterly breeze across the southeast will make it feel cold, with coasts being particularly exposed. It will remain rather cloudy but dry. It'll be cloudy across Wales, but a few outbreaks are possible, particularly in the west, and there is an outside chance of an isolated shower or two, but it will be mostly dry. Across the Midlands on Saturday evening, it will be dry, rather cloudy, but with clear spells, especially in the west. There is a chance of a few showers, mainly in the east, and it will feel cold everywhere. An easterly wind will feed showers westwards across northeast England, and some of these will be heavy and turn wintry in the highest peaks later. Rain and drizzle will slowly clear west across northwest Scotland throughout the evening. Elsewhere, it's generally cloudy with some clear spells and isolated showers affecting the far east coast. A few showers will continue to affect eastern coasts of Northern Ireland. Most places, though, will remain dry with clear spells developing, feeling chilly overnight with lows of 4 degrees Celsius. Overnight, we'll see further showers, mainly in the east, but drier further west. And that's how the weather's shaping up overnight into tomorrow morning.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GBNews. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
It's something that you would never want anyone to suffer.
I didn't know what channels there were. I didn't think I'd be believed.
I must have weighed about 7 stone and I'm 5'8".
My instincts was to sort of cover this up. I mean, clearly that was a mistake.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and tune-in apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today. I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked. Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Welcome back to Real Britain with me, Emily Carver, on GB News, on TV, online and on your digital radio. Now, it's been a rather difficult week for the royal family. It was hit by another racism row after Lady Suzanne Hussey resigned from the royal household for a supposedly racist line of questioning towards a charity's black chief executive at a Buckingham Palace event. This, alongside the release of a trailer for Harry and Meghan's long-awaited Netflix docuseries. I'm not sure if you've been long-awaiting it, but some people have, that's for sure. It's overshadowed the Prince and Princess of Wales's trip to Boston for the Earthshot Prize. A little bit, anyway. To give his take on this difficult week for the royals is royal commentator Michael Cole. Michael, now I understand that you've spent a little bit of time with Lady Suzanne Hussey. Any idea of how she's feeling after this rather unceremonious resignation?
I should think she's feeling rather bruised at the moment. Yes, indeed. I followed her around the world. I saw her interacting with people from all sorts of backgrounds and races as she accompanied the Queen as her sort of Queen's head girl is what she was. And the job was very much more than just collecting the bouquets. She was a very skilled and silky operator, introducing people, smoothing the path for the Queen, and making the people who came into the royal orbit feel rather special and on a memorable occasion. Now, here we have a picture of the lady who actually spoke to her at this reception. And let's just remember what this reception was about. It was given by the Queen Consort, Camilla. Mrs. Zelensky of Ukraine was there. It was there to spotlight the scourge of male violence on women, of vile crime. But unfortunately, all of that has got forgotten in the row that's blown up here. And what actually happened was Lady Susan was engaging conversation with Mrs. Fulani, who formed a charity in East London to combat male violence, domestic violence, and violence by men against women. And according to Mrs. Fulani, Susan Hussey, then cross-questioned her about her racial origins and her family and so on. Now, we don't have a transcript of a recording. We have Mrs. Fulani's recollection, which she immediately put onto social media. And if you read it like that, it's awful, it's appalling, it's unforgivable. And immediately, in a great act of loyalty to the Crown, Lady Susan Hussey immediately apologised for the hurt caused, and she resigned. But you and I know that tone of voice and context is very important in a situation like this. They were all wearing their name badges, and that's how Mrs. Fulani knew she was talking to Lady Susan. And I can quite imagine that Lady Susan, in fact, we know that she looked at her name badge and she has an exotic name. And I can quite understand Lady Susan saying, oh, really, you know, that's interesting. You know, where do you come from? It's
yes,
something,
Michael, I think a lot of our viewers and a lot of the general public really have been quite hurt or actually upset by this story, because this lady, and of course we don't know all the details, we don't know what happened, we can only go off what we've read and what I know from the press, but she was there representing only African and Caribbean heritage women. She was there to represent their cause. She was dressed in what might be considered traditional African garb, then to be asked where she was from and where she was really from, why that might be clumsy questioning for sure, but it seems rather a normal thing for someone, particularly of her age, to say. It does have a sort of whiff of stitch-up about it.
Well, you've actually opened up a whole can of worms there. You may very well be right about that. We can't say yet what the real background of this is. But as your previous male guest was saying, he was talking about his racial origins and his antecedents. It's a fairly normal thing. I heard another commentator say last night, distinguished commentator, say he's often asked about where he comes from, and he says proudly Pakistan, but I've been in this country for this number of years. That's natural curiosity. If you take that all out, and if people can only talk in generalities and banalities, it's going to be really a rather boring world. I mean, the Queen was absolutely a past master of this, because when she met people, and she met almost millions of people she didn't know, she would probably use the opening gambit of saying, have you come far? Well, nobody can much object to that. And of course, it leads on to greater conversations. But do we want to reduce conversations to the anodyne, to something which is so inoffensive that it's not even worth listening
Michael,
to?
I'm terribly sorry, but I'm going to have to interrupt you because I'm being told that we're squeezed by the news. But thank you very much. I do hope we don't get to a situation where people are afraid to even speak to each other for fear of being
agree with you more.
offensive.
Emily,
Thank you very much, Michael Cole. That was royal commentator Michael Cole joining us there to discuss the latest race row in the royal family. Now, you're with GB News on TV and DAB radio. After the break, the protests rocking both Iran and China blow apart the idea that autocracy is superior to democracy. That's the view of Defence Editor Con McLaughlin. Is Vladimir Putin's axis of evil crumbling around him? Now it's time for a check on the news headlines, but stay with us.
Emily, thank you. Good afternoon. It's 3:34. I'm Bethany Elsey in the GB newsroom. Parents are being urged to be vigilant and look out for symptoms of Strep A after 6 children under the age of 10 have died from infection in the UK. Symptoms are usually mild, but the UK Health Security Agency is now investigating rise in severe cases. Experts say that a lack of mixing during the COVID-19 pandemic could be behind a drop in immunity. A wealthy Russian businessman has been arrested on suspicion of money laundering, conspiracy to defraud the Home Office and conspiracy to commit perjury. The 58-year-old was arrested at his multi-million-pound home in London by a specialist police unit investigating oligarchs. 2 other men were also arrested in connection with the money laundering. All 3 have since been released on bail. In a tweet responding to the arrests, Security Minister Tom Tugendhat said, "We will defend our democracy and hunt the Kremlin's criminals." Police have charged a 3rd person with murder after 2 teenage boys were fatally stabbed in southeast London last week. 18-year-old Hussein Bah has been charged with the murder after 2 16-year-olds were stabbed to death just a mile apart. 2 other suspects, aged 16 and 15, appeared at Bexley Magistrates Court yesterday, charged with murder, and were remanded in youth custody. And today marks 30 years since the first ever text message was sent. 1 in 3 people still send and receive SMS messages every day. The first text was sent by engineer Neil Papworth in December 1992. It read, "Merry Christmas." You're up to date on TV, online and DAB plus radio. This is GB News. Don't go anywhere. Emily will be back in just a moment.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Mark Stein. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
Why not take us home with you by visiting the GB News shop at gbnews.store. You'll find all the official merchandise, a really good present actually for yourself, your friends or your family.
We ship across the UK mainland at no extra cost. GB News, the People's Channel.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
The guy went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions.
I have no time for cultural totalitarianism.
We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Welcome back to Real Britain on GB News with me, Emily Carver, on your TV, online and digital radio. Now, the Foreign Secretary has warned that Vladimir Putin could use peace talks to restock his army before launching another attack on Ukraine. In an interview with The Telegraph, James Cleverly said Putin was not acting in good faith and that the topic of peace talks should be approached very, very carefully. Meanwhile, Telegraph defence editor Con Coughlin wrote this week that Western democracies should draw confidence from the collapse of Putin's axis of evil with Iran and China. Joining me is Con Coughlin himself, who is defence editor and chief foreign affairs columnist at The Telegraph. Con, this axis of evil, Iran-China, how is it crumbling?
Hi, Emily. Well, I mean, you just have to look at the civil unrest that has broken out inside both Iran and China to see that these two very autocratic regimes are facing some of the worst unrest they've experienced in decades. In China, it started over protests about the COVID lockdown, but has now morphed into demonstrations taking place throughout the country, with people actively calling for the president, Xi Jinping, to stand down. And then over in Iran, we've had 2 months of nationwide protests now, which started with the death in custody of a young woman who'd been arrested by the religious police for not wearing her hijab properly. And again, that has morphed into anti-regime protests with people calling for the supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, to stand down, and has even seen the home of the founder of the Islamic Revolution, Ayatollah Khomeini, burnt during the protest. So these are pretty serious protests by any chalk.
And Con, how will this impact Putin? To what extent is he reliant on having strong allies from Iran and China?
Well, Emily, I mean, Putin finds himself basically the Billy No-Mates of the international scene at the moment. He's shunned at by G20. I mean, the only people who support him at the United Nations are countries like Iran and Syria that have, autocratic regimes of their own. So, he does need support. And practically, he was relying on China's support at the UN. He was hoping that China would continue buying Russian oil, which it's doing, but at very knockdown prices. And of course, Iran's helping Russia to evade UN sanctions. So they've been quite important allies. And the fact they're now crumbling from within will be a great worry for Putin.
Is the hope now that Putin will, if not run out of steam, run out of money?
Well, I think that's what we all do hope. And certainly the economic sanctions are biting. I think the EU initiative to limit the price of Russian oil to $60 a barrel will also have an impact. Russia's come to rely on oil prices of around $100 a barrel. That's helped to pay for the war, to pay for the military rearmament, which has enabled Putin to invade Ukraine. But if that dries up, and we know that his stockpiles of military equipment are very low at the moment, which is why he's having to use Iranian drones to attack Ukraine. So if the money dries up, the war dries up, and that could well force Putin to the negotiating table.
I mean, it's quite something if you can't get the Chinese government and the Iranian government on your side as a despot, I guess. But James Cleverly, now he's what I view perhaps as a statement of the obvious, that Putin might potentially use peace talks as an opportunity to restock his army. Were peace talks on the cards?
Well, Emily, there's been a lot of talk in the last couple of weeks about the possibility of peace talks. We've had Joe Biden basically say to Putin, if you pull out of Ukraine, we can talk. You've had Emmanuel Macron say that, any future talks should not demand Putin's removal. So there are some important world leaders who are talking about this. And also, you've got people in Europe, like the Germans, are quite keen to see some kind of negotiated settlement to Ukraine. So where James Cleverly is coming from, and I admire him for this, he's basically saying, this is not the time to appease Russia. And let's not forget that Putin has lied to us time and time again. He's not a trustworthy negotiating partner. And yes, I think, as Cleverly says in the Telegraph interview, that we should be concerned that he would use any pause in the fighting to rearm and launch another offensive.
And I want to ask you, what's the significance of the Prime Minister of India, his recent intervention? He's criticised Russia's weaponisation of food this week. Of course, previously they abstained from the UN resolution that condemned Russia's invasion just a few months ago. How significant is that?
Well, I think India finds itself in a rather difficult position because, India's main geopolitical rival is China, and for that reason, they've had this relationship, this alliance with Russia, which is why they were reluctant to condemn Russia at the start of the war. But the longer the war's gone on and the more brutal the Russian tactics have become, you've seen the Indians start to move away from Russia and almost regret their relationship. So, the Indian Premier Modi is basically saying to Putin, we do not like this war. We've never liked this war, and the sooner it ends, the better.
And we've talked about how Putin's axis of evil might be crumbling. He's losing support left, right and centre, but also in his own country. Russians aren't on board, are they, at all anymore?
No, I think there was a very revealing opinion poll this last week, Emily, where I think they found that only 1 in 4 Russians now supports this conflict. And of course, the Russians have taken very heavy casualties. The latest estimate is 100,000. That's more than the size of the entire British army. These are astounding figures. I think the Russians lost a total of 10,000 during the whole 10 years they were in Afghanistan. So if these figures are correct, the Russian armed forces are being decimated. And of course, if for every Russian soldier who lives his life, that there are family and friends in Russia left mourning, and the news does get through eventually that their sons and fathers or whoever are not coming home, and this will have an impact. And despite the efforts of the Kremlin state-sponsored propaganda to portray this as a patriotic war, a heroic war that's going great guns, the message is slowly getting through to the Russian people that this is an unmitigated disaster.
Yes, I mean, in this conflict, one must not lose sight of the amount of lives that are being lost on both sides, both the Ukrainian soldiers, of course, but also Russians and their families. They must be absolutely devastated, and reflected in that poll that you just mentioned, how their feelings are, well, they're not backing Putin any longer on this. Thank you very much for joining us. That was Con Coughlin, defence editor and chief foreign affairs columnist at The Telegraph, of course. Now, lots of you have been getting in touch today throughout the show about today's topics. On Sajid Javid announcing he'll step down at the next election, Jackie has to say, all MPs should stand down. They are all useless. Perhaps Jackie's an anarchist. They are all useless at best or woke at worst. We need a new party to vote for. I can't vote Conservative next time, and definitely not Labour. We need a party that represents the people. Perhaps we should all group together and start our own. We can't do any worse than this lot, I imagine. Anyway, on strikes, Martin says, I work on the railways. We all want a realistic pay rise, not the high levels the militant unions are demanding. And some levels of change are necessary in working practices. I hope that they reach an agreement now, but if the RMT and the other bandwagon unions go through with these next set of strikes, they are basically holding the country to ransom. It will be another economic lockdown. Workers and other members of the public not involved with the strikes will surely not support this because no one will win. I mean, Martin, that's a very balanced view from someone who works on the railways. It does seem that there may be some workers who are being a little bit bullied or pressurised into going along with this strike action, and they're not seeking such a mega pay rise as the unions are themselves, but we'll see. Mark says, I have no sympathy for the level of wage increase being demanded. Greed and divisive political agendas should never be rewarded, I believe he means, Mark, there, not awarded. Yes. It seems I'm not sure I would say that the nurses are greedy. I don't think that's fair to say, but I think there's an unrealistic ask there when it comes to 19.2%. I don't think many people working in many jobs around the country are getting a near 20% increase at this time. Tony says, with respect to all the strikes proposed this month, I would like to say, as I'm not happy with my state pension amount. What will happen to me as a pensioner if I decided to go on strike and stop paying my council tax, income tax, electricity and gas bills, telephone bill, TV licence, rent or mortgage? I guess I would be rapidly placed in jail. Well, if you remember, there was that campaign that was telling people to just not pay their energy bills. Just don't pay them. Don't pay them. See what happens. I think that's probably not a very helpful thing to tell people because, as you say, they may be rapidly placed in jail for not paying. But I get your sentiment. Now, we're going to be moving on to our next topic, which is an interesting one and one close to my heart, having gone to university not all too long ago. The government has reportedly watered down a bill designed to prevent universities from cancelling speakers considered to be controversial. The act originally would have allowed academics and students to sue institutions for infringing on their free speech rights, but amendments have been tabled that will only allow legal action as a last resort after exhausting all other options. Now, joining me is Arif Ahmed, who is a philosophy professor at Cambridge University. Arif, are you there? Hi. Brilliant. Hello, thank you for joining us this afternoon on Real Britain. Now, just to start things off, why should the general public even care about free speech in universities?
Well, I think there's a number of reasons. One of them is that universities are a kind of filter through which pretty much the entire managerial class of the country, people who go on to work in publishing, in museums, as well as in universities and government, pass through. And they also pass through at a very formative time of their lives. So the attitudes that people get when they're in these institutions eventually filters out through the whole country and makes a massive difference to everyone's lives. Because if we live in a country where the government doesn't see free speech as a fundamental right for which people have died, and perhaps the most important right in a liberal democracy, then we're going to go down a very dark path.
Now, I think this kind of legislation that's intended to protect freedom of speech is very important when it comes to academic freedom. So professors don't essentially get the sack for producing papers, research, etc., that doesn't align with the general liberal consensus or whatever. But I think for students, and I remember my time at university not too long ago, it was more a self-censorship that impacted students the most, a fear of giving an alternative view that might not have, that their professor may not have agreed with, or that their peers may not have agreed with. How do we combat that cultural problem that people are afraid to give a different point of view?
No, I agree. There is a cultural problem, and it can be combated to some extent by the legislation, though it requires more than that. One of the things that can be done at universities, which I proposed, for instance, is that we can start students when they come to universities. We give them some sort of induction or training as part of their joining a new institution, where they're taught this is not like school, and to some extent, it's not like the workplace either. The whole point of a university is that you can explore new ideas, you can think about all kinds of crazy things and occupy all kinds of different intellectual spaces. And you're not committed to anything, you're not going to be punished for it, and you're encouraged to disagree with all kinds of things, including, crucially, the prevailing orthodoxy. So I think by showing that, not only by telling them that, but by showing it, by inviting speakers who have controversial ideas, by showing themselves to be free to discuss controversial ideas, I think professors can do a lot, and universities can do a lot to inculcate these attitudes into students. Though I agree that by itself, the legislation won't be enough.
Yes, I mean, it's very difficult. I think you're more likely to see trigger warnings on curriculum in universities than you are to see professors talking up the importance of free speech. It did seem that in some seminars, people would be shocked by someone even saying perhaps that they intended to vote Brexit. Back in my time, that was the debate that was raging at that point anyway. Now, in terms of this particular legislation, do you think that it has been watered down? Do you worry that it will be?
Well, the first thing I say is you shouldn't say trigger warning, because that phrase is itself triggering, apparently.
Oh, no.
So I've seen documentation which says, yes, you should say content note, not trigger warning.
Content note, I'm very sorry.
That's right, so make a note of that. With regards to the legislation, yes, I do think it is a watering down. As you said in your report, what's happened is that the statutory tort, so the mechanism for going to the courts to complain about a university's behaviour, is now been delayed until after it's gone through various other processes. And the problem is, as someone said, who themselves have been at the sharp end of this, is that it can give universities and managers an excuse just to run on complaints processes, to kick things into the long grass so that nothing gets settled. There's no form of injunction that can be used to remedy things in the interim. And of course, it's the courts that can really actually compel universities to do things and to enforce serious costs. So some of the deterrent effect of this bill will really be lost if it's being weakened in this way.
Do you think, as someone with experience as a professor at such a well-known and reputable establishment as the University of Cambridge, do you think that some professors use their job, perhaps, as a way to become an activist on the political stage? It does appear that many professors are using their platform not only to broaden young minds, but also perhaps to use it to further their own ideology. Is that fair? Is that even something we should be worried about?
Well, I think it's important to be careful here, because on the one hand, the part of the point of universities being free is that professors as well as students ought to be able to defend pretty much any view they like in a way that's legal. So I'd be very cautious about saying that professors shouldn't be able to express this or that political view, including ones that I detest and totally against, as well as ones that I'm in favour of. Having said that, the thing that does concern me is not so much individual professors as institutions themselves taking sides on political issues. So when an institution, for instance, takes side on one political issue, say it's to do with race or perhaps to do with trans issues or perhaps even Russia versus Ukraine, these are all political questions, and you might not think it's for universities to take a stance on these particular issues, because they as corporate bodies should be neutral spaces in which professors can then take different positions. And that's as set out, for instance, in the University of Chicago. There's a famous work called the Calvin Report, which sets out exactly that universities are there to irritate and disturb and offend and shock and make people think about all kinds of new ideas. They are not second-rate political lobbying groups.
Yes, I would like to see perhaps universities being given the freedom to, make very clear that they are places of free speech where any view is allowed, any legal view is allowed, and that students should feel comfortable in expressing that, and professors as well, which is certainly absolutely crucial too. Thank you very much for joining me on the programme. That was Arif Ahmed, Professor of Philosophy at the University of Cambridge. Now that's it from me. You've been watching Real Britain, of course, with me, Emily Carver. Thank you very much for your company this afternoon. It's been a lot of fun for me. I hope it has been for you at home. Thank you for sending in all of your messages. This show, of course, is on every Saturday at 2 p.m. For now, I'll have to leave you with the weather.
Looking ahead to this evening's weather, and the UK is looking cold but cloudy for most, with showers affecting eastern areas. Let's take a look at the details. It will be mostly dry across southwestern England, with a mix of clear spells and scattered showers, chiefly across Devon and Cornwall, and a keen wind will make it feel rather cold. A northeasterly breeze across the southeast will make it feel cold, with coasts being particularly exposed. It will remain rather cloudy but dry. It'll be cloudy across Wales, but a few outbreaks are possible, particularly in the west, and there is an outside chance of an isolated shower or two, but it will be mostly dry. Across the Midlands on Saturday evening, it will be dry, rather cloudy, but with clear spells, especially in the west. There is a chance of a few showers, mainly in the east, and it will feel cold everywhere. An easterly wind will feed showers westwards across northeast England, and some of these will be heavy and turn wintry in the highest peaks later. Rain and drizzle will slowly clear west across northwest Scotland throughout the evening. Elsewhere, it's generally cloudy with some clear spells and isolated showers affecting the far east coast. A few showers will continue to affect eastern coasts of Northern Ireland. Most places, though, will remain dry with clear spells developing, feeling chilly overnight with lows of 4 degrees Celsius. Overnight, we'll see further showers, mainly in the east, but drier further west, and that's how the weather's shaping up overnight into tomorrow morning.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here. You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing! You see